Ladies and gentlemen, we have a fireside chat on the topic in the world of deepfakes. As the title suggests, this discussion will shed light on how one can learn to avoid issues such as deepfakes with technological advancements. And for this session, we would like to invite Apar Gupta, advocate, public policy professional, and Vivan Sharan, partner, Koan Advisory. And to take over the moderator's role, we have Nandagopalan Rajan, editor, new media at Indian Express. Please join me in welcoming our esteemed guests up on the stage.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll start by assuring you that we are actual people. We are not deepfake sitting here. And that will be a clarification that you might have to give for a lot of things in the future, as in is already happening. So on that note, I think I'll start with Apar and ask him, Apar, like you have this new menace in town. It was supposed to be a fun thing initially, but it's now already hitting a menace level. So how and who is going to police this to start?
Okay, so I think the question which you posed, I'll just repeat it again, is that it's a menace and who will police it? So firstly, we need to understand that the technology by itself will have both beneficial as well as harmful uses. For instance, I make YouTube videos now to explain a lot of policy issues on my channel, and sometimes I read from a script. It's not only me looking at a camera. Looking at a camera and talking is really difficult. But there's a simple click of a button which can correct my eye movement. Okay? That is also a form of a deepfake technology. And similarly, audiovisual representations of historical situations which have occurred in the past will engage a better learning outcome in terms of young students being more engaged with the content. Think about the Gandhi Dandi March in being rendered in 4K. So we have to look at it from the perspective where the technology will pose both benefits as well as challenges. And I've said this because more often than not, the news items which have characterized deepfake technologies have been towards either indicating that it can lead to morphed images and videos of celebrities, and over a period of time, other people also to show them in certain situations which may invite ridicule or social shame. Okay. Now, it's important now that we understand some extent of the problem to understand its breadth. Okay. The problem is not only with respect to celebrities. It will, as the technology becomes more accessible, be open to any person, in fact, to create a generative base of AI for text, audio, or video. It can be imitation of sound, so your voice. It can be an imitation of video, okay? And to a large extent, it won't only be limited then in terms of its harmful uses to the using or showing a celebrity saying something or doing something, or an internet influencer. It can also be you. In the same point, it can be used not only towards showing people in situations which are explicit. It may also be used to damage trust in society. For instance, one of the predominant uses of deepfake technologies has been in terms of electoral propaganda and canvassing and advocacy. There's a great article in the MIT Tech Review, Nandagopal ji. So if you look at it, the political parties have started using it, in which one video, but they auto-translate that into 20 languages. So it's already happening. Now, you may ask, what's the issue with that? The issue with that is you're not being told clearly that this is generated through a process in which the person who has been videographed saying these words to you has actually said them. So I think one of the fundamental bases we quite often look at terms as policy is a high amount of transparency around these processes. If you're seeing something which is generated by deepfake technologies, you need to be told that it is generated by deepfakes. I'll come to the legal provisions a little later on, but what I'd like to leave with is the scope of the challenge being broad. And it can be used, especially in a diverse society like India, in which people quite often share different kinds of practices. We are a multicultural country, to also show people who are not like us doing some things which may play to our biases. And we have a cognitive ability as human beings to believe what we see. So it's important for regulatory frameworks to develop around this. But I'll come to what is the law right now with regard to deepfakes and how well we are protected a little later on.
So, as Apar said, like, if you're not giving that that cue that this has been generated or is synthetic content, even very positive content can be problematic, especially in a country like India where people don't realize that what you are watching is synthetic, because they are generally under the perception, if I'm seeing something, hearing something, it will be true, right?
That is correct. And I think that applies to a lot of us. Also because when you're using generative technologies, there may be a point of inaccuracy, misrepresentation, embellishment. Think about it as a tool which is assistive, but you need to make a proper declaration. And that reminds me, actually, a great book which has been written recently by Leslie DeMonte on AI Rising. It starts actually with a disclaimer. It says no part of this text in this book was written by an AI-based tool, probably the last of its kind.
And on that, I'll come to Vivan. Like, so the technology is there. So humanly, it's often not possible to discern what is synthetic and what is not, right? But is the technology developed enough to say that it can create these maybe these disclaimers on its own?
So there are three ways technologically, predominantly, that we can deal with deepfakes. And as Apar said, it's a dual-use technology in a sense at the creation level, involving either what are called GANs or generative adversarial networks, or something called autoencoders. Be that as it may, the point is the first level, which is often in discussion, and I think Apar will touch upon the legal validity of this, is the distribution of deepfakes and how to control through technology filters the distribution of deepfakes. That goes to the heart of questions around freedom of speech and expression, because it assumes that you can put everything through a technology filter that you put online. It also assumes many things of the way content propagates. Content now, as we know, propagates across platforms. Much of the disinformation that we get may be behind encrypted messaging platforms, may originate from an open source, and so on and so forth. So this cross-platform nature of virality of audio-visual content and of the paradox of trust that Apar also mentioned, where we tend to trust audio-visual content more, all of these things make it a very complex problem to solve at the distribution level, but I'm sure we will try. The second way in which one can look at this paradigm is at the creation level. Look at watermarking or putting some sort of a tag on content that is produced using technology and open, and there are many softwares that any of us can use to create deepfakes today. As Apar says, he's been creating many deepfakes of late, in some sense. But the point is that is linked to mitigation with the provenance of the content in mind. Now, this is not something that can be mandated or legislated where you say that all sorts of content must have a watermark, because there are 3 billion, 4 billion people who are using the open internet and producing content. But what can be done here is look at content factories. And particularly, I think some of the biggest disinformation content factories, I don't think anyone would disagree, no matter what their ideology today may be, is indeed from political parties. So look at the content factories or the IT cells that political parties run and mandate that the Election Commission should mandate that the political parties are watermarking all the content that is produced from these factories. Doesn't matter whether it's good information, bad information, malicious information. That's a secondary issue. The point is at the level of creation, where does the watermarking onus, where can it be effectively enforced to some degree? Second is media, where you guys have an onus of watermarking all content, and I think that's doable. It will come at a cost, but it's a cost we have to absorb. And the third is government. And I think you've seen this in the context of the executive order that Biden administration released a couple of weeks ago, where they basically are telling their own government agencies, first and foremost, to be accountable for the content that is produced, that is public communications content. And that is something that we can immediately implement in our context. We have an entire cadre of so-called information service officers. In each department, there is an information service officer or a few of them who are responsible for the content that goes out at the end of the day from that department or ministry. And at the state level also, there's an apparatus which can be sort of brought within the purview of a very simple public interest law or a mandate for the government to follow. And that then rids you of a significant share of the problem from the perspective of provenance. You cannot, as I'll repeat, you cannot enforce this mandate on individuals or on content in general. It has to be specified as to which communities or originators are you looking at with this mandate in mind. And the government must, again, to reiterate, in the US context, most of the accountability obligations that they are thinking of, first and foremost with respect to AI, falls on the government itself, because that's controllable. And whether it's 20% or 50% of fake content that originates from, which is either linked to the government having said something which it didn't say, or indeed somebody who is generating it from a political factory where there may be misinformation or disinformation on purpose. So, whatever the objective of the content, there's a large amount that will originate from these. And then final layer is detection. And there I think we again deal with plenty of paradoxes, because currently the state of the art in detection relies on the entity that is using this detection technology having access to a database where there are images, videos, voice of the originator or the original content propagator, so to speak, or generator. And that is compared with the fake content or the deepfake. Now, the paradox here is that obviously you need to have a lot more of the former to be able to efficiently detect the latter. So you are in effect saying create more audiovisual content on the internet of almost everybody to make that available for these neural networks to be able to do their job well, which is to identify the fake content. Again, another added paradox here, which we can discuss further, and I think it's a little more connected to the root of the problem or the solution, is that there will come a day, and this is not my take, but a scientific take, there will come a day when deepfakes will become perfect. Now, when that day of reckoning comes for India, I hope it's not immediately, it's not in the next few years, but when that day of reckoning comes, we will have to stop looking for easy answers. So we can talk about the hard answers perhaps after looking at the easier ones.
So I've seen a lot of AI platforms also bring in a little bit of self-regulation in a way. If you looked at the beta versions of some of these platforms, you could do anything, and now you can't. For instance, like you can't download an image or a video of a specific individual on many of these platforms. So do you think a little bit of self-regulation will come at the creation level also?
So again, like the detection thing that I mentioned, it's already in use for what they call CSAM content, right? And the biggest platforms in the world use it. And there are cases almost every day filed in police stations and courts across the world based on the fact that there is some CSAM or high-risk content that has come up on somebody's phone, somebody's platform, somebody's database that is actually very harmful and has already been recorded in a sort of hashed database of known bad images, audio, video, etc. But then it's contingent on that database of bad things to be there and to be expansive enough for the detection to happen based on that. The other detection technologies which don't rely on hash databases are expensive. So the question as to who will bear the cost is an important one, and they're slow because it's a case by case detection that you're talking about. So you can't really release that, on top of Twitter, for instance, and say, now go and detect everything that is fake. It takes a lot of computing power, and so on and so forth. So, and of course, privacy concerns, because you're collecting more data to actually be on top of the data environment. So that paradox, unfortunately, is something that is hard to reconcile with.
So, Apar, if I can come back to the original question, so how do we tackle this legally, or is it possible to tackle it legally, or India is going to take its time as with other legal things that we do?
If we only look at it from the limited purview of what laws can be made to tackle deepfakes, I think that will be a myopic and a limited view of the problem. I'll be picking up from what Vivan has indicated, is to be that what is at the surface and most visible is the distribution of the deepfake. What that means is what we see in terms of a video, which is a deepfake video and shared across social media platforms and becomes viral. The Rakshmika Mandana video comes to your mind. And what does the law then do? It requires a takedown process. It requires a social media company to have terms of use which prohibit such content being shared by the users who sign up to its site, and also then having some form of filtering, takedown process for notification or for its own detection of such kind of content. I think detection is tougher, notification is easier, so a user can complain or the government can complain. That's the first line of response which has been stated by particularly the Minister of State, Mr. Rajiv Chandrasekhar, that recourse can be taken to the IT rules and people can complain to these platforms for takedowns of deepfake videos. The second course is been indicated is criminal action and complaints which can be filed under section 66D, which is the punishment for impersonation. But then again, that faces the same old bottlenecks of proper investigation being done by the police, the complaint actually resulting in a FIR, etc., etc. And what we should notice is that, to a large extent, both these responses, which are rooted in law at present, emerge from the burden being cast on the individual, is the victim of the deepfake itself. Thereby, it's not a systemic solution per se, right? Now, the way we need to think about AI-based technologies, and deepfakes are only one type of generative-based AI-based technologies, is to think about a whole of society response. It requires us to assimilate this technology, taking into account its benefits and also considering the harms, which will require responses beyond the law in terms of curriculum and education, structural ordering, constant curative practices, which means studying the state of the technology and informing the various arms of the government what needs to be done. Money will need to be allocated for a lot of these things. So I think we need a better degree of foresight when we look at AI-based technologies, in which we also, with a certain degree of humility as lawyers as well as experts, realize that the technology is moving fast. It's developing fast, right? And we will need to constantly be studying it, forecasting what is needed in terms of state responses. And such bodies do exist. If you look at the order which has been issued by the White House on safety and trust, which has been referred by Vivan, it deals with impacts on employment, not only generative AI. It deals with surveillance issues. It deals with how AI-based technologies actually are built, which require a constant stream of data to be surveilled on people when the public data runs out. So you scrape the entire internet, but how do you perfect your model? You either want users to contribute their data, right? Or you surveil them to perfect your model and then correct it. So the simple answer to this is it's a large, wide issue. It's a social transformation. And if we agree with it, there needs to be policy development which needs to be much wider than it being first considered only as a legal problem, threat or menace, but also as an opportunity and a technological change, just like the internet caused for us. And the second is that beyond the law, we will need to have institutional frameworks to study it on a continuous basis. That's only when we can come to some possible solutions or try to have some kind of solutions to what Vivan calls the tougher problems, the harder problems.
In case of a lot of regulation or a legal response to what's happening in technology, we have taken the stand that we are a little bit slow, but that usually benefits us. We have many ways of putting it, like we have leapfrogged it or whatever. But do you think in something that is so fast evolving like AI, you really can afford to do that, or you really need to start thinking yesterday?
So, Nandu, I'll be candid here and it may offend people, but I think we are dealing with an incompetent set of policymakers. I've reasoned it very openly. What is the last central enactment which was passed on technology which was called revolutionary? It's the Digital Data Protection Act. It has an exemption built into Section 3 which provides for an AI company to scrape our what it calls as public data, which means anything you put on social media. Right? And at that time, only a few months ago, the Minister of State was saying that this is for promotion of AI-based technologies in India. Well, where are we sitting today? We are sitting today with the menace of our pictures being used in deepfake videos. Why did they not consider it at that time? Why did they provide an exemption at the last minute? Why was it not put to public consultation? Why were experts not given a chance to deliberate on it? These are reasonable questions to ask. Now, you contrast that with the GDPR, which I don't think so is a perfect law, but at least that provides a right to a data principal, you and me, to say this is my picture, take it down, or don't train your data on the basis of my personal data. That right is not there under Indian law. The second reason, and I will refer in fact to the Indian Express Delhi Confidential column, is a difference of opinion between our policymakers. The cabinet minister, Mr. Ashwini Vaishnav, says we'll come out with the law in 10 days. And Mr. Rajesh Chandrasekhar, the minister for state and IT, says that the laws are enough. And in fact, they have reported on it. So I would say the present approaches, which are limited to public events, media interactions, or just talking to industry, are not working. We need actually deliberative, long-term study on these issues. And it's not like, let me balance this by saying that it's not like MIT has not attempted it. It did form an AI committee which came out with 4 different reports through different groups, Group A, Group B, Group C, Group D. If you look at Group D, its report is actually on the ethical, legal, and social impacts of AI. And this report was made pre-pandemic. Let's start with just trying to implement it probably in law, right? If the experts have studied something over a period of time, maybe update it and see what can be done to take into account those recommendations rather than one committee's recommendations just being a PDF which is hosted on a website.
If I can come to Vivan. Vivan, a lot of people think that AI or what we are seeing now is a new technology. It is not. It's been in the making for decades in a way. But it is actually gathering steam in the past year. So, in fact, we are almost a year to when ChatGPT was launched. So it's also gathering steam, and the fact that it's learning, quickly with millions of people, using it. What scares you on the technology front? That how it's developing. We are seeing very believable deepfakes, but but then we don't understand. This is still very early days.
Yeah, I think looking at I don't think we have to peer into the future to be scared. Firstly, so far be it from me to comment on, the state of play of AGI and whether human-like intelligence residing in machines will lead to existential questions for human beings. I'm sure it will, and we will have to confront them as we're confronting many other planetary risks, sometimes with inaction, sometimes with inertia, sometimes with loose coordination, as we're seeing in the COP28, and a lot of irony mixed in. But I think the current state of technology itself raises three types of risks, and Apar alluded to them. The first is at a psychological level, where, of course, all of us are victims. We get up in the morning, we look at WhatsApp, and we infer, the state of the world in part from the information that we receive within such messaging platforms, as well as, of course, on social media. And the psychological impacts of that in a information environment which is accelerating and serving us content which is more immersive, more convincing, and linked to this issue of deepfakes is obviously something for us to contend with. The second is the financial risk aspect, which I think there was a discussion on financial frauds, etc. here. And I think you don't need to look too far to imagine how AI will play a role. For instance, social engineering is already the main way in which Indians are defrauded. About 80 to 90% of complaints in any thana around financial fraud will link to social engineering and not some advanced technology at use. But combine that with very basic forms of AI to replicate voice, for instance, of people you know and you trust, and it becomes extremely difficult to see a way out unless we are taking serious educational initiatives at scale. And this can't work if it's only targeted at the youth in schools. We have 300 million old people in this country. My mother doesn't know how to use a debit card, far be it from her to look at videos and tell if they are real or fake. So it's a daunting challenge to also deal with our very variable demographics. And then the third most troublesome aspect of this, which is I think where again Apar also dwelled for a while, is the societal risk. Of course, the electoral risk we've seen play out with technology in the context of Cambridge Analytica, which ignited the debates around platform regulation and privacy in the Indian Parliament, and have led us to where we are in some sense, definitely contributed to it in terms of whatever little action we've taken so far in the regulatory realm. But the risk of disinformation being used as a tool for information warfare by state and non-state actors cannot be underestimated. We are all victims of that form of disinformation today. And in an increasingly noisy world where I think, again, the media has to play a much, much bigger role to actually serve as the fourth pillar as opposed to contribute to some of the disinformation or misinformation. It's going to be very tough for the average citizen to be able to be resilient in this war. And this is not a war where we can send people from the hinterland to the border to fight. This is a war in our bedrooms, in our drawing rooms, and a war that any fragmented, fragile society stands to lose if action is not taken in a concerted manner. And I fear that, like with climate change, this is a wicked, complex, hard problem. It takes multiple wheels to turn together to be able to deal with it. By the time we actually respond to the information warfare concerns around artificial intelligence originated information, it may be a little late, in the sense that we may not even know how it's impacted us. And that impact can play out, in terms of subtle shifts in, where we stand as a society vis-a-vis different issues. And overall, I suppose it will work towards fragmenting the societal fabric further rather than uniting it. And obviously, India too is experimenting with how to use information warfare on other countries, on adversarial nations, etc. And I think some of the learnings from our own sort of proactive action in that sphere should really be put out to, should really be a matter of introspection and consultation with, close groups to figure out how we will in turn respond. It is a cat and mouse game in some ways, but to frame it as such is also perhaps misleading, because at some stage, as I mentioned with the deepfakes, when it becomes perfect, when it's indistinguishable, then you are where you are as a society. You have to respond with whatever strength or weakness you have at that moment. And this in many ways is also the reality of AI today. The generative or the large language models that have scraped the internet have already scraped the internet. They have built in the biases that the internet has. It has built in where the world is today. There is no recourse to going back 20 years and generating new information to train those models. And in many ways, the determinism of technology means that there is no turning back the clock on the large language models and the frontier models that will be developed in the days to come. Therefore, there will be many inflection points in society and in our future, whether AI mediated or otherwise, where we will have to respond based on our given strengths or weaknesses. And AI is no different. In fact, AI serves to add to the list of planetary risks that we must be a little more alert to, which means a more enlightened political discourse across countries to actually respond to risks that are systemic, as opposed to work in mission mode on small problems that are easier to manage.
So, and I have a question to both of you. So if we have to tackle this now and creating awareness, enough awareness, and at scale, at a pan-India or at a global scale is important. So who takes the lead on something like that?
Who takes the lead?
Lead on we have to create the awareness and we have to maybe create it right now.
Yeah.
So how do you do that?
I think all of us in this room have to take the lead. It's like saying who takes the lead on, thinking about climate change seriously. I think we all have a part to play. I mean, the media's part is very clear on the disinformation and AI realm. And disinformation is currently the biggest risk of AI at a societal level, at least. I don't think we have to worry about people sitting and making nuclear bombs using artificial intelligence, because if they had the capability and the materials, they would make it in any case. But so media has a very, very critical role to play. I mean, I hope that media reinvigorates itself and rises to solve this problem. But I think all of us in our capacities as participants in civil society have a great role to play. We have a role, of course. What that saying that boon se pani say, क्या कहते हैं, पानी भरता है या जो भी है, that's also sometimes it leads to a certain level of inaction and false optimism and false hope. I don't think we should nurture such false hope. That, for instance, again, I'll give you an analogy of climate change, that if we turn off our water faucets while brushing our teeth, that we are going to solve the water crisis. It's perhaps the wrong way to think about it. I mean, there has to be, at some level, a level of thinking of it in terms of the proportion of the challenge, the size of the challenge, and where you can make the most difference. So I think as a society, we have to kind of identify those areas first. Where can we actually respond? Obviously, in our schools, we'll have to respond. And where is it that we need to make the most difference in education? I think it's in the quality of education rather than, actually thinking about just the coursework.
Of course, all of us take part of this stuff.
Yeah. In terms of coursework, you can use AI and create the best coursework for students to understand, the risk that they confront. But who is the
almost
teacher?
It's almost a life skill now.
Yeah, exactly. But I think, upgrading the quality of the teacher and the teaching is very, very important in the context of education. And then I think for the kind of work that, say, Apar does in courts, it's important to educate judges and jurists about how these risks can manifest in terms of biases, in judgments, in in everything that a court does, how it deals with criminal proceedings, etc., etc. So I think each of us will have to tackle it at our levels, but that is not to say that each of us, that this approach will add up and it will be meaningful enough. I think we will have to organize around it in communities in a more concerted fashion, as we are seeing perhaps in the case of Scandinavian countries organizing around, or there's younger communities organizing around climate change. Given that all other dimensions of life seem to be taken care of, there are these kind of questions about what is the future that we want and where are we, what are we trying to do to achieve it, and what is our sense of purpose. These are driving questions for community formation in the Scandinavian context. In the Indian context, given where we are in per capita prosperity, I think it may take a while to get to a point where you have a democratized conversation around this at the community level across the country. And therefore, it does stem in some ways, the responsibility is in many ways of people who are sitting within rooms like this, who have achieved Maslow's base needs, and now have the ability to set aside some time, energy, agency towards questions like these and addressing them through the communities that they're part of, but also collaborating across communities so as not to work in silos.
Apart, so on a response, have you seen anything across the world which you think is sort of going in the right direction? You mentioned how the US government and Biden is looking at it in a way.
Yeah, so I think studying forms of regulation already. If you look at the European Union, it's already neck deep in a 2.5-year-old process on what it calls as the AI Act, in which AI-based technologies are graded as per a risk, and there are certain forms of regulation which vary from soft to hard, and then also complete prohibition or bans which are there. For instance, facial recognition technologies, due to the political risk that they cause, not being allowed in certain purposes because it may lead to very authoritarian practices as they exist in China, right? Now, I think rather than looking at other countries, we should just look at ourselves and our history. So people have this misconception that the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology became a full ministry recently, about 3 years back, when it was separated from the Ministry of Telecommunications. That's incorrect. In 1998, Pramod Mahajan was the first Minister of Information Technology, if you go back. If you go back to the allocation of business rules, if you see how the ministry actually existed, it was separate from the Ministry of Information Broadcasting, and it was separate from the Ministry of Communications as well, which was with Ram Vilas Paswan. Okay, it was an independent ministry. And questions were put to him, what is your mandate? What will you do? And he actually brought out the Information Technology Act, which was made in the year 2000, right? And then when he became Minister of Communications, again the ministries merged because Pramod Mahajan was Minister for both. Okay, what we need are institutions which are thinking about our present from a very different point of view. Whenever we are presenting the annual budget, there is a document which accompanies it, which is called the National Economic Survey. If we accept that the two large forces in our world are capital and technology, why do we not have a national technology survey? After all, money is what determines work, right? So why don't you survey the state of the technology? What are the institutions, government, public institutions looking at it, and then provide it money to do the work, which needs that work, and survey it on an annual basis. I think this is not an issue which is limited in the sense that you make one law, you make one policy document, you are announcing one press conference, and it will fix itself. I think it's really big, and I think it needs to be dealt with a very different approach to what is it being done today. And while I'm at it, of course, MITI is right now an independent ministry, but if you look at its budgetary allocations, only in the last budget has it increased over a period of time. But if you see the job postings, they're mainly hiring lawyers. And as a lawyer, I can be happy about it, but I don't think so that's the best use for it. I think what should be done are specific stakeholder groups, expert groups which should be made, and there should be a larger collaborative basis in policy making and design, right? People who are even critics, possibly not me because I'm quite candid, but other people who also write and disagree with the government need to be invited and placed on the table, because that adds to the level of foresight. I think, Nandu, what's happened even in Europe, if you look at how the AI Act has been developed over a period of time, if you go through that bureaucratic process and you look at it, there is an active involvement of civil society and criticism which is invited through that bureaucratic process. Of course, I don't love what comes out of Brussels, and I don't think so EU should have the mandate of setting the rules for the world. I think our problems will be very, very different in India, which is why we need the people and the institutions to think about them very differently.
So we are almost out of time. I'll wrap it up by just, in a way, summation that it's a completely new field. It's dynamic. It's changing on an hourly basis. Because that is the nature of the beast. It learns, every second. It gets better. But it's up to us, all of us in this room, outside, everywhere, to sort of start fighting it and pushing back. On that note, I think Apar and Vivan, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
It's been a very insightful session. Thank you.